Hey, what's up? My name is Chris and welcome to Coding in Public. Today I want to walk you through how to build out a responsive navigation that will work for both desktop and mobile devices and is going to have a lot of accessibility built in by default. Now, as you can see here, it's working well on desktop, but if I switch over to my mobile view, and let's shrink this down, you can see the exact same navigation is being used here. And now it just slides down when I click this button, and then when I expand it back out again, it just pops back in as a desktop view. So I'm going to show you how to do this again using just HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Let's go ahead and jump right in. All right, I've got the project open over here with live server, and all this code you can grab in the description if you want. You can see that most of it is working. In fact, if we start to scroll, there's even some cool kind of slide-in effects and things like that. I'm not going to show you how to do that today. If you are interested in those, I have done a series on intersection observers where I show you how to do that, and I'll try to remember to add a card after this video. So we've got everything ready for the navbar that we need to add right up this way. And if you look over here, we've got nothing in the HTML. Let's kind of think through the structure of what this needs to look like to be auto-responsive before we just start typing. So I've got a Figma file open over here, and we can use this to kind of talk through stuff. Now this whole area right here is going to be where the navbar lives. And the navbar is going to stretch all the way over. In fact, let's get another rectangle and drag this whole thing out. This would be like where the navbar is going to be. So it'll be the whole way across. That's horrifying. Let's change this color to something else. All right, that'll work. You can see this whole area is going to be the navbar, but inside, I actually want to have a container inside this that doesn't go all the way to the edges, that is going to hold my anchor link over here to the home, and then also will hold all the other links I want in my navigation. Now, you might see that this is kind of doubly wrapped in some divs. And the reason I've done it this way is that we're going to actually have a hidden button right here on desktop. This right here is our UL, and this will hold all the links. And so on desktop, it's just going to look like this, and you won't be able to tell that there even was a button. All right, but as soon as you switch over to mobile, you can see over here, now what happens is that button becomes visible. This is that outer div right here, but the UL actually moves up above, and then clicking this button is going to slide this up and down. So we need to actually think through this structure like this before we start kind of building stuff out. So this is how we're going to structure it, and double wrapping it allows us to have this kind of pull out of the flow of the navigation while still being connected to all of this. All right, let's go ahead and jump into the code. Hopefully that makes sense. If not, I think it will as we code this out. Everything's going to live in a nav element. This gives us the role of navigation automatically and some other helpful accessibility things. And then remember, we want the actual navigation to not stretch the entire width of the screen. Well, we're just going to have everything inside of a div then with a class of container, and then I'll add the class of nav container as well. That container is just a utility class I have in this project. You can see in the CSS later that keeps everything from going all the way to the sides. Next, we're going to have that link tag, and it will have a class of logo link, and then I'm going to point it to the home page. And then we will go ahead and add that SVG here in the middle, but before I do that, I want to add one more thing. I'm going to add an ARIA label that says something like go to homepage. Now that's important because it doesn't have any text in this logo, so I need to actually provide some kind of description for assistive technology so it knows what this link does. All right, next inside here, we're going to have an image tag, and this will point to my assets, and that will point to my logo mark. Don't need it like that. And we can give this like a logo or brand logo or something like that for the alt attribute. Now, this actually does require an extra load because it's going to have to go fetch this. So if I save it here, you see it should pop in somewhere. I think it's up this way. Right now it's taking on the color. So if I pull up my sidebar, you can see this logo mark. Let's see. Fill is all current color. So right now it's taking on the current color of the fill, which is a dark color. But if I were to change all of these to like white or something like that, you should be able to see it pop in right there. Now I'm going to use current color so that way we can just set the color of the link and it will just automatically inherit that down to the SVG. Now what I'm actually going to do is copy all of this out because even though I just linked this as an image tag, I don't want to have to make an extra fetch. So I'm going to go ahead and just paste this code directly in here so that when the HTML page loads, the SVG will load as well. And then just so that it's a little cleaner, let's go ahead and close this down so you don't have to look at that the whole time. But just to kind of show you why I do it that way, you can link it as an image or you can just add it directly as an SVG in there. All right, next we've got that doubly wrapped section. So let's go ahead and add a div with the class of nav wrapper. And then you'll remember we've got a button that we're going to hide on desktop, and then we've also got that inner kind of UL that we're going to use to actually have the links. So let's have the button here, and we'll add it with a class of button and a class of button menu. And then I'm also going to have an ID of menu button. It's kind of confusing the way I did that, but that's what I did, all right? Now there are a couple other things we need to add in here. We're going to use this to expand the other area. So I need to add on here an ARIA attribute called ARIA expanded, and then I'll set this to false. And this is a way of telling assistive technology whether or not this section is going to expand something else and whether or not it is expanded. So then this is what it's going to control. So ARIA controls is going to be the menu, and that will point to the ID of that UL that we'll have here in just a second. And then finally, I'm going to have an ARIA label of open mobile nav. Now let's open the sidebar. I've got this navigation SVG right here. I'm going to go ahead and copy this out. And whereas I made up that logo, I got the navigation ID from Hero Icons right here. I think it was just like menu or something like that. Yeah, right here. I just copied the SVG, and that's what I'm going to paste right inside here. I did make a few small changes on this SVG. I think it was already set to current color, but I did change the width to 32, and then I also changed the stroke width to 4. Once again, let's go ahead and collapse this so we don't have to stare at all of that. We'll pull this back up. We've got just one more section to add inside this nav wrapper, and you'll remember that's our UL. That's going to hold all of our links. We're going to give it a class of nav links, and then we'll give it an ID of menu. Now this ARIA controls is going to point to this so that assistive technology realizes this button controls this section. I'm going to add one more thing here, which is a role of menu bar. And I'll show you how that helps here in a second when I turn on VoiceOver on my machine. Now this is a UL, so inside here we're going to have a bunch of list items, and I'm going to set these to a role of none. And again, because we actually have a menu bar in here, it's going to look for some menu item, and I just want to make sure that these are not considered as the menu item. Inside here, then we'll have links for each of these, and I'm going to give all of these a class of nav link and a class of button. Now this first one's going to point nowhere, and it's just going to say home. And then I need to do one more thing. I'm going to give this an actual role. So I'm going to say that this is a menu item. Now when I turn on VoiceOver, you're going to see that it's going to read out each of these items as menu items of this menu bar. All right, so let's go ahead and copy this down. I'm going to copy it down 3 more times, and then I'm just going to change out the text for each of these going forward. So let me do that, and I'll be right back with you. All right, so all I've done is change out the links where they point to, and then I've changed out the text. Now we've got home, about, donate, and donate. This was supposed to be contact. All right, contact. All right, so we've got all those set out, and that's actually all the HTML we need to do. And again, this is the same as we did on our Figma file. We've got a nav with this container keeping everything in the center and not all the way to the edges, and then just 2 items underneath it, our logo, and then everything else is in this doubly wrapped section with nav wrapper, and then this hidden button on desktop, and then our UL. Now let's go ahead and open our sidebar, and I'm going to pull up the style sheet. And I've got a lot of this already built out. Again, you can grab all of this in the repo. But what we now need to do is style this, and we're going to go mobile first. So let's go ahead and design this first of all for mobile, and then we will add in desktop as we need to. So let's start with the nav. It needs to have a position of fixed, and that will keep it to the top of the screen. And then to make sure it always is on top of everything, I'm going to give it a z-index of 10, so it stays on top of everything else. And then we need to make sure it sets its width all the way 100%. I do want the background color to actually be transparent, and you can see here that I want to be able to see kind of the stars through this section. And then as I scroll, I've actually got an intersection observer already waiting for this that will then catch it and then transition it to a different color. So I need to start it on transparent. And then I'm going to add in a transition here, background color. It will do it for something like 800 milliseconds. And then for the timing function, I'm just going to paste in a cubic Bezier curve. You could just do like fade in. That's fine as well, but I like it to be a little bit more dramatic. And so that's what we're doing here. If I save this, you can see over this way, now we actually get this transparent background and it's stuck to the top as I scroll. Now, one more thing I do want to do is add some padding, and I just want it to be up and down, not side to side. So there's a couple ways to do this, but I'm just going to use the logical property here of padding block. We'll do 1.2 rem like that. Now I mentioned that I actually want this to get a darker background, and we're going to do that with a class. So we'll have nav whenever it's active. I'm going to change the background color here, and I've got a variable set up top just called dark, so we're going to add it like that. We'll actually interact with that when we open up the nav menu on mobile. The next thing we need to add is our nav container. That was one of the classes we added on the kind of the wrapper around all the nav items. And here I just want display flex and justify content space between. And what that will do is it'll take the logo and put it all the way on the left and everything else all the way on the right. It'll separate those two kind of direct children. And then I do want align items center, and this will keep them vertically aligned just like that. Okay, so you can see now they're stacked up. They're all the way on the opposite sides, and that's what I want. Now we did also have a class of container, and let me just come down here and find that right here. And basically this is just going to put everything in the middle. This is a little one-liner that basically says, hey, make it this width and then keep everything in the middle. All right, and I've got a video coming up on these kinds of one-liners if you're interested in that, but that's all that's doing. Okay, let's come back over here. The next section we've got to work on is our logo itself. You might remember that this SVG is set to get its current color from the parent. Now it's wrapped inside of a link tag, and so it's getting that purple kind of default color. Let's go ahead and change the color here. We're going to change it to our var of accent. And now you see it takes on our accent color. That's perfect. Now I want it to have a little bit of room left to right, so let's give it a margin inline of 0.5 rem. And then finally, I want the width itself to actually dynamically adjust as I move from small screens to big screens. We want this whole thing to be responsive. And you can do that with a property. First of all, we'll grab the width, but with something called clamp. And this is going to take a minimum value you're going to let it get, a preferred value, and then the largest you would allow it to get. So if we use responsive values, we can actually scale this as we move the screen. So the smallest I'd ever want it to get is something like, maybe let's do something like 3 rem. And then the largest, or kind of the preferred value, would be something like 8 view width. And then finally, the largest I would ever want it to get would be like 6.5 rem, something like that. So if I save it here, you can see it's real small right there, but as I move, it actually gets bigger and bigger and bigger. Maybe actually let's make this more like 10 view width. All right, there we go. So it stays pretty small to start with. It won't get any smaller than this 3 rem over here, but as I move it up, it's going to get bigger and bigger until it locks into place at this 6.5 rem. And maybe this is what I needed to change to maybe something like 7.5. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so you can see now it's getting a lot bigger. All right, so that's an auto-responsive logo as well. Now, even though we're working on mobile first, if I come over here and I start to tab around, you can see we've kind of got this ugly outline. Now that's important for accessibility to have some kind of outline, but you can style that. So let's go ahead and do that now. And let's just go ahead and do the nav links as well when we're here. So I'm going to grab the logo link, and whenever there's a focus visible on it, and then let's copy this down, because I'm also going to grab the nav link as well, same kind of thing. So we're going to treat both of these the same. We're going to grab the outline that's default and then change it to 4 pixels solid with var of accent. And then we'll do an outline offset, and we'll set that to something like 0.2 em. And then we'll give it a border radius of 0.5 rem. So now when I come over here and tab around, I actually get a nice border that matches the rest of my theme. All right, there's one other thing I want to do, and that is I want to add a grid to this and then place items center. And that will ensure that the SVG is in the exact center. So now when I tab over, you see it shows right in the very middle of that. So we've got this left side taken care of. Let's now work on the right side. So I'd like to style the button itself, but before we do that, let's actually get those nav links kind of out of the way. So let's grab our nav links. This is that UL. I'm going to set this to display a flex and then align items a center. And then we'll set a gap between everything of 1.5 rem. Now, because flex naturally sets stuff off side to side, we actually need to come in here and say flex direction of column, and that will stack them back up. And then you'll remember on mobile, this needs to be a position of absolute. This will allow us to pull it out of the flow of the document and put it up above the viewport. Now, if I save this here, you can see now it pulls itself out, and now we've just got the button over here on the right and this logo over here on the left. I'm going to comment that out just for a second so we can actually see how we're going to style this. First of all, I want a background color here, and we're going to set this to one of our variables I've got set up top already, which is a variable of dark. And remember, you can grab all this code in the description if you want to match my exact colors. Next, and let's come up to the position absolute. I want my top to be 3 rem, so that's 3 rem off the top of the screen, but I want my left to be 0, and I want my right to be 0 as well. Now, because I don't have position absolute, you're not going to see that, so let's go ahead and put that on. So you can see it's basically just kind of in line with the rest of the navigation. Now, you might see that it's actually covering up this logo here and the button a little bit. Now, the entire nav container section here, let's see. The navbar itself here has a z-index of 10, so the whole thing is going to always be over everything else on the screen with a lower z-index. But because this comes later in the DOM, it's actually covering up its parent. So the easiest way to fix that is to come back in here and let's set this to a z-index of -1. Now that -1, because it's still wrapped inside the parent, is not going to be below anything else. It's just basically putting it below everything else in that parent itself. Stacking context can be kind of weird, but that's what we're doing. All right, let me come back down this way, give ourselves a little bit more space. I'm going to add a few more things. So first of all, we're going to have a padding all the way around of 1.5 rem. And then I'm going to have a border bottom here of 4 pixels solid var of my accent color. Now by default, this should actually be above the entire viewport. So let's come back up here and I'm going to add, let's just do it up here next to the position absolute. We're going to add a transform translate 3D. And I'm doing 3D just because it engages the graphic engine. So we'll do something like 200%, -200%, and 0 like that. So it actually pulls it up above everything else. Now I do want a transition property set on this. However, if I set it right now, whenever I load the page, it'll slide up and get out of viewport, and I don't want that. So we're going to add the transition later in JavaScript by adding on a class. So let's go nav links like this with activated. And then I'm going to go ahead and paste in here a transition property. And you can see here it just is on the transform. It takes 0.4 seconds and it's got a cubic Bezier curve. So it kind of dramatically slides up and then slides back like that. All right, so that we can see what's going on, let's just go ahead and comment this one out. And that way it's down this way. Because now we need to style our buttons, and that includes our menu button. But since these all have a class of button, they've got some shared things we can add to start with. So I'll have a button here. We'll have a color var of text to start with, and then text decoration of none. And then I'm going to have a padding of 0.03 rem and 1.5 rem. So that's up and down, and then left and right. And finally, I'm going to have a cursor of pointer. Since these ULs inside here are links, these will automatically have the cursor, but this will not. So we need to change that up. And then they're all going to have a border radius of 0.5 rem. All right, we're mostly there. Let's go ahead and add our button menu. And we're going to add here a color of var accent, because I actually want that to have that purple color. And I want the background color to be transparent. Because these buttons normally have a border, I don't want that. And I do want display grid, because what we're going to do is place that SVG in the exact center. So place items center. So let's add padding inline. This is another logical property, just left and right here of 1 rem. And then I'll paste in a transition here where we're going to have a cubic Bezier curve for 0.3 seconds. And again, you can just use fade or something like that. But rather than making you watch me type out a cubic Bezier curve, I figured I would just paste that in. If we save that, that should actually update our menu button to look just like we want it to. And we've got a cursor and everything's set to go. Now, there's a couple things we obviously still need to do. First of all, let's go ahead and get these looking right, and then we'll worry about what this should look like when we expand it. So let's come down here. These are anything. Let's go ahead and grab anything with the role of none on it. That's an LI, and that would obviously be our LIs. And then anything with a nav link, which is our links inside the LI. And by default, I want these to have a width of 100%, and I want them to be display of block. Then I'm going to change the font size here to 1.1 rem, and then text transform will be uppercase. Now that's great. I actually do need them to be in the center though. So let's come back up here to my nav links, and let's just add it right here. Let's say text align center. There we go. Everything's right in the middle. Now I want this bottom one to actually have some different styling to it. And so the only way I can do that is to add a special class to it. So let's come in here. And you see here they all have nav link and they have all got button, but this last one I want to add one more thing, and we're going to say button dash accent. So we're going to use that to be able to style that a little bit differently. So let's come down here and let's see, button menu. Let's go ahead and copy this down. We're going to say button of accent. And here let's go ahead and strip out a bunch of this. I'm going to leave the padding, but we're going to change the background color here. We'll just change this to our var of accent. So now I've got that there, but I do actually want to add some extra special padding just for this button itself. So we're going to have 0.3 rem is fine, but I actually want left to right to be more like 2 rem. Now on mobile, this isn't really going to make a big difference, but on desktop, this basically allows this to have a little bit more space since it's got that background color. All right, now we are almost done. All I need to do is come down here, and what we're going to do is use this button menu. You might remember we added, oops, sorry about that. This button menu here, we added that aria expanded equals false on it. But what we can do is, since we're already going to change that to true, we can just use that to trigger everything else in the UI. So I can say my button menu here, whenever it has an aria expanded equals true, then I want to do something on the button itself. First of all, I want to transform it. I'm going to rotate it 180 degrees and rotate like that. So it'll basically flip and kind of do a half turn whenever we click it. And that's why we added that transition up above. I'm going to go ahead and copy this down because in addition to changing something there, I actually want to change the menu as well. And because this is a sibling element and it comes before the UL, I can just target the UL with a plus sign. So it's sibling of nav links. And what I want to do there is say translate 3D, and here I just want it to be 0, 0, and 0. So it's going to bring it all the way back down where it belongs. Now that's actually most of the way there. Let's come back up here and add back on our transform so that that mobile menu pulls out of the way, because the only other thing we need to do now is get it working on desktop. So I'm going to pull it out this way. In fact, maybe let's just do this. Let's zoom out so that it kind of mimics a desktop view, and that way we can style it while still seeing what we're doing on the left. So I'm going to add one single media query over here, and it will just be media. And I'm just going to grab the min width of, let's do 768 pixels, which is a good like tablet size. Whenever we're in here, the first thing we're going to do is hide our button menu. So we're going to say display of none. And there it goes. It's gone. It's out of the way. Next, let's go ahead and grab our nav links. This will be the UL. This needs the most changes probably. First of all, I want the position to be static, and that's the default. So it's going to come back into the flow of the document. Now you can't quite see it because of its transform property. So let's change that too. So transform, what was that? Translate 3D. We're going to set this to 0, 0, and 0. And this is on any desktop. So there it is. It's right over there. That's great. But now you can see it's stacked up the wrong way. So let's move our flex direction back to row. And let's take off our border. Let's also take off the Z index. Let's put it back to 0. Padding to 0 as well. And you might remember I had a top and a right and a left property set to something. I can just reset all of those with inset 0. That's left, top, bottom, and right all to 0. And then finally our background color here, let's set this to transparent. Now if I save it, there you go. It looks like it belongs, just set right out that way. Now one more thing, let's come down here and we're also going to grab our LIs with the role of none, and our nav link, which is the actual link inside of that LI. We're going to set the width back to initial. Now let's go ahead and zoom back in. Some of this is a little funky because of the way we got it zoomed in. And now you can see if I come over here, I should be able to click here and this should expand now once we get to the JavaScript. But now we've got the styling all set up, and I think that's actually the thing that kind of breaks your brain the most, is getting it to style correctly. And you can see as I transition back and forth, everything should be working. All right, that leaves us one short section left, and that's just the JavaScript. So if I come over here, I'm going to open up this nav.js, and I've got a bunch of intersection observer stuff down here you don't need to worry about, because what we're going to do is come up here and just worry about that nav popping down and going back up. Now we need to grab reference to several things. We're going to have our nav button. That'll be document.querySelector. And we're just going to select the ID with menu button. That's that ID we gave to the mobile menu. Next, let's copy this down a couple times, and then I'm just going to change this out to nav. So we actually want reference to the entire nav element. And then I also want to grab my nav links, and this will be that UL of nav links. All right, so with all of those set, we need to do a few things. Let's go ahead and say, first of all, whenever our nav button is clicked, so let's add an event listener here for it of click. And then let's just write this inline here with an arrow function. And I need to figure out if this whole thing has been expanded or not. There's a couple ways to check for that, but basically what I want to do is take that aria expanded true or false and turn that into like a genuine Boolean. So let's go ahead and grab that and say like is expanded, something like that. And what we can do is say nav button.get attribute. We're going to get the attribute of aria expanded. Now that will give us true or false, whether or not it's expanded, but it's not going to be a true Boolean. So there's a couple ways we can get that, but one of the ways is by using JSON parse. And so if I come in here like this, that'll now give us a kind of true, genuine Boolean. And then all you have to do is say nav button.set attribute. We're going to set the attribute of aria expanded to whatever the opposite of is expanded is. So if it's false, it'll be true. If it's true, it'll be false. If I go ahead and save that, I should be able to come over here and click this. And now this should be set to true or false or whatever. Now, let's see. This should be actually popping down, and it's not. So let's see what's happening. Let's first of all make sure that it's changing properly. So let's come inside our double wrapped section right here. Aria expanded true. All right, so that is changing. That's good. It should change false, true, false, true. Okay, good. So it must be a problem in our styling. And you may have seen this before, but this says expanded, and this needs to say expanded. All right, there we go. So now it pops in. I should be able to click this, and it just kind of pulls in and out. Let's come back to the JavaScript. There's a couple other things we need to do. First of all, I want to add a class of active to the nav itself so that it gets a background color. You might remember we decided to add it that way. So what I can do is use that same Boolean to set whether or not we should have a class of active on the nav. Now, this might be a little confusing, but basically when we're checking for this, it's before it's been changed. So what I actually need to do is say if it's false, so if it's not expanded, even though by the time it hits this, it will now be expanded. Hopefully that makes sense. Then this is a little ternary, and we'll just do a shortcut here with a double ampersand, nav.classlist.add active. So now if I come in here and click this time, now this should actually get that dark color. And when I click here again, it'll actually stay on, but that's okay. I've got an intersection observer to where if they ever scroll to the top of the page again, it will remove itself. And anywhere else, we'd actually want it to be on anyhow, which is what I do with the intersection observer down here. All right, so we've got that set. There's one more thing we need to do, and that is when we click here, you can see we've got no transition at all. It's just very harsh, and that's because we decided to add the transition later in JavaScript. So let's go ahead and listen on the window. So we're going to add an event listener, and we're going to listen for DOM content loaded. And whenever that loads, we're going to grab our nav links.classlist.add. We're going to add the class of activated. That will allow it to load in first and not do that weird transition where it pulls up out of the screen. So after it's loaded, then it will add that transition. And now it will be on there whenever we click. Hey, this is Chris from the future. Sorry to interrupt here, but I realized as I was editing this that this navlinks.classlist.add activated needs to go underneath the click event listener, not the DOM content loaded, because the CSS won't have fully painted everything on the page at that point. So basically every time you click, the very first time you click, it'll add that activated class. And after that, it will essentially just ignore it. All right, thanks for letting me interrupt. Back to the video. Now, while we've finished up the project, there is one more thing I want to show you. And that is, you might remember we added all those ARIA attributes and things like that, so that with assistive technology, it would be a lot easier to interact with. Let's actually just move over to the finished project because it'll be easier to see over here. I'm going to hit on my keyboard Command Function F5 to turn on VoiceOver.
Link image. Go home. Navigation. Chrome has new window. You are currently on a link. To click this link, press Control Option space.
So you can see here it's actually reading out exactly what I'm selecting, but if I move over just by tabbing to the nav section,
Home menu item, menu bar 4 items. You are currently on a menu item. To choose this menu item, press Control Option space. To close this menu, press Escape.
So you can see it actually tells it, hey, there's 4 items in this menu item because I've labeled this whole area as a menu bar and then each of these items as menu items. So if I move to the next one with the tab,
About menu item. Donate menu item. You are currently on a menu item. Contact menu item.
You can see how that works, sets up some context when you're actually viewing this on desktop. Now let's take that off for a moment.
VoiceOver off.
All right, and now let's go ahead and switch to the mobile view so we get access to all of that. And then I'm going to turn it back on.
Go home. Navigation.
Now let's go to this next one.
Open mobile nav collapsed button group. You are currently on a button group. To click this button, press Control Option space.
So you can see how Open Mobile Nav actually shows when we select this. And it says that it's connected to a button group.
Open mobile nav expanded button group.
And now we know it's expanded. And if I hit Tab,
Home menu item, menu bar 4 items.
so let's turn that off.
VoiceOver off.
So you can see how a little bit of work with ARIA attributes actually makes this a way better experience for those with assistive technology. Now let me leave you with one final challenge. This is something I didn't feel like I could fit all the way in this video, but really what you'd want to do to kind of spiff this up a little bit more would be to add a bunch of keyboard navigation when you get inside of this mobile menu or the desktop menu. So what you'd want is probably this to have a tab indexed of 0, so the normal tab indexing, and all of these to not be indexable by the tab, so not be able to find it by tab. But once you select this first one, if you know you're inside of a menu bar, you should be able to hit the over arrow or the up and down arrow, depending if you're on desktop or mobile. Then you should also be able to hit end or home to jump to the first or last item in that navigation area. So there's several other keyboard navigation things that we could add, and I'm going to challenge you to add them. So either grab the code in the description or use your own code and then add on to those some keyboard navigation like we just talked about. Well, I hope this basic navigation was a big help to you using just CSS, HTML, and JavaScript. If you have any suggestions, I would love to hear them in the comments. But other than that, I will catch you next time. Thanks for watching. Happy coding.